Financial crises have simple explanations, but unfortunately you wouldn't know that if you studied economics, because economics assumes that economies are inherently stable. It's not true. Through history, there are simple explanations for why we have a boom and bust cycle, but they're usually not taught. That's what you'll learn in this video.
Hello viewers, we're coming to you today from New York University International Relations Department, and I'm here with Dr. Noll, Professor of International Relations here in New York University and Senior Fellow at World Policy Institute. Today we're going to explore financial crisis. Since it's a part of my project, it's a very interesting topic, and I'm very curious about Dr. Noll's views on financial crisis. In the last video, we talked about the contending private power strategy within finance.
Yes.
I'd like to ask, do the financial battles between bears and bulls that we talked cause the many financial crises within history?
Yes, because financial crises are basically caused by a contraction of credit.
Right.
Booms are caused by the expansion of credit. So what you have to understand is where are the incentives for those policies? That is, what is the private incentive for expanding credit and what is the private incentive for contracting credit? And part of the reason why you have the formation of bear parties at certain points, we call them culminating points, is that as asset prices rise more and more through continuing expansion of debt, the bulls that are taking that debt, that are buying assets with debt, are becoming more and more vulnerable on the one hand, and they're also pushing up prices in a way, prices of whatever assets they're buying, say stocks, real estate, whatever, in a way that becomes kind of unsustainable. And so at some point, those who are controlling creditors become bearish and think it's a good opportunity now to tighten credit, and the most vulnerable bulls will be bankrupted, their assets taken over cheaply, the economy will cool down, and a new lending cycle can begin. So that's the whole idea of expansion and contraction of credit is related to strategic policies of creditors themselves.
Well, yeah, well, bulls actually profit from the expansion of credit. And
correct.
Presumably financiers, investors profit from lending to bulls.
Correct.
So why can't virtuous credit expansion go indefinitely with ever-rising asset prices such as real estate and stock prices?
Yeah, well, the reason that asset prices can't rise forever is that they are constrained by the fact that the real economy only grows so fast, and the real economy has to produce all the goods that wealthy asset owners are claiming as income on their assets. So for example, if you're a stockholder, you take dividends. If you're a bondholder, you take interest. If you're a real estate investor, you want to take rent from your properties. To be able to get adequate return on the value of an ever-rising asset, you're attempting to claim more and more of a relatively limited share of society's assets. And at some point, expansion of asset prices will come to an end simply because of the battle over relative shares of society's product, and the very wealthy asset owners can't keep claiming more and more without pushback, without resistance.
Right, so you're saying that if bulls keep wanting more and more, investors will run out of patience and stop lending to bulls, because kind of like ever-rising asset prices threatens the value of loans that they actually own. Yes,
because loans themselves, of course, are priced in currency. And when we see asset values going up, that's inflation. Inflation is the reverse of the falling value of money.
Right.
Loans are denominated in money, so if money is falling in value because the prices of everything like real estate are going up, then all those owners of money, which includes the owners of loans, the creditors, are actually losing out relative to the owners of other things, say real estate or stocks or whatever. So it's the battle over asset values and over the expansion and contraction of credit is one of the foremost struggles for the distribution of income within our society. And most of the time, most of us never think about it because we're not in that financial world. We don't realize how critical it is to the fortunes of the rich and powerful.
Right. Where do you get this idea of culminating point? Where bears and bulls line up for a titanic battle?
Well, this comes from the term actually comes from John Maynard Keynes. One of his more obscure books his longest work, which is called the Treatise on Money. And he talks about bears and bulls and the culminating point in their struggle. Unfortunately, most of the people who learned Keynes never learned that part of his thought.
Right.
And I kind of rediscovered it after I had already realized from studying history that every financial crisis sees this kind of struggle between those who still want a continuing expansion of credit and are still eagerly trying to push up asset values through their purchases and through their leveraged buying of more and more, and bears who get nervous about the overheating, so to say, of the economy and want to start to curtail credit to slow it down. So this kind of situation, I didn't have a term for it, but then I went back and reread parts of Keynes and found, he had a term, culminating point. So that's where I actually get the term.
Right, very interesting. Will bears inevitably win at every culminating point? Because what I see from the tendency, from the history, 2008 crisis.
Well, of course, because we have a business cycle, eventually it's when prices turn down, bears are winning. Right. So it will sooner or later be a point where bears are winning and many bulls will be bankrupted. Conversely, there'll always be another period of expansion when bulls are making money hand over fist, and if bears are too conservative, they'll be losing out.
Right.
So that's part of the nature of the cycle. But in terms of exact timing, you could be at a point that looks like a culminating point, in which there's a battle, but it's a real battle. It can go either way. I mean, like any battle, in the short run, you could have a period of time where, because the relative resources are greater and because there's still a lot of enthusiasm for further economic expansion, the bulls might prevail, and you'll see another run-up of prices after maybe a dip and then another run-up. In the financial world, they often call it a correction, right? You'll have an expansion and then there'll be a downturn. Oh, it's just a correction. What they're saying is they're hopeful that there'll be more wind in the sails of the bulls. They'll be able to push things up a little higher before the eventual big crash.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to know, can your method of political economy can predict anything? It sounds so contingent.
Well, it's necessary to have a contingent theory when you're dealing with strategic interaction. And this is the thing that I was frustrated with as I studied economics over the years, is that everything is based on mechanical models in which there is no contingency, and that's a flaw. Because as in battles in war, for example, even if you have a lot of information, even if you're one of the leaders of finance, let's say the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, you still only have limited information, particularly about what your adversaries are doing, about the credit moves of other players, and about the asset purchases of other players. You may have the most information in the system, but nobody has enough to really predict what's going to happen next. They can get an idea, sort of to use a military term, what the terrain looks like, what the circumstances are, something about what the various contending forces are. But it's never adequate information. And so everything in a financial battle is somewhat contingent. Right.
Well, so how do you study this? Aren't a lot of action of investors really hard to discern?
It's true. And actually, it helps to both study history and to look for the clues that are currently available. If you know what to look for, there's actually a lot of clues as to what's happening in the financial world, what kind of battles are happening. The problem is so few people are trained in what I call the strategic method nowadays to even be able to look for the clues, to know what to look for. That's one of the reasons why I teach this subject, is because I want my students to be better equipped. And I do talk to financiers both in the U.S. and China, for example, to try to learn, what do they look for in terms of clues. It's a little bit like an iceberg. You have a clue an iceberg is there when you see the little bit of ice on top of the water. And you have a theory that says if there's a little bit of ice sticking out of the water, the rest of the other 90% is there also. Even if you don't see it, it's there because you know what the specific density of ice is relative to water, and so you can predict it. It's that way with a lot of financial politics. You sort of know the incentives of players. You're not going to know their every action, but you get enough clues that you can sort of put together at least an adequate picture, and predict much better, by the way, than if you assume there isn't strategic action, which most mechanical models do. So at least you have to be aware that there are powerful strategic parties in opposition to one another who are contending over the future, and then look for the clues of that battle. And then you can actually predict better than if you just had a mechanical model that ignores all that.
Right. Well, you've blogged that we are nearing, by the way, a blog called Polarizing politicaleconomy.com. You can find a lot of interesting articles there. So you blogged that we are nearing a culminating point. How
Yeah.
you can be that sure?
Well, there are always clues, and I'm not the only one saying this. Obviously, one of the clues, in fact, is that big banks are saying this.
Right.
Right. Several of the major banks now are starting to publicly warn their customers that this credit cycle is running near the end. That debts are high and unsustainable. They're trying to advise companies to cut their debt levels, to cut their expenditures, things like that. These are all things that both predict a crisis and help bring it about, because obviously the big banks' policies are going to influence, credit and spending of a lot of participants in the economy. So it's both a prediction and an action that helps create a self-fulfilling prophecy that prediction will take place. So you have to pay attention to what big banks are doing, what they're saying, how they're positioning their assets, and other big players in the economy too. Are businesses investing? Are they buying back their stock, a bearish move? Or are they investing in real production and expansion, which would be a bullish move? So you look for the different clues in the economy. And now I see there's a lot of indications that the bears are assembling and that we're going to get a financial crisis probably this year or maybe next year.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, if it seems like that is a big part of the story. So, if the expansion and contraction of the debt caused the crisis, could we just eliminate the debt and still have a functioning economy there?
No, I mean, it's necessary in a complex economy to have a credit system.
Right.
Because the production process itself now is not like the old economies of hundreds of years ago where people could have simple tools and produce the food and produce the goods they need. Most of what we use to produce our output are highly expensive and complicated machines and software and means of production that are necessary to produce something. But you can't start producing until you've spent a long time buying the equipment, setting it up, developing a whole system of production. All those things take time, and during the time when you're setting up production, you're not getting any income from it. You need to find a way to pay for it.
Right.
And credit is really the thing that bridges that. But the problem is that's not all that credit does.
Right.
In the economic storybooks that we have in economics classes, we talk as if the only thing that credit is used for is productive investment. But actually most of credit is used to buy real estate, for government financing, for speculative credit, to buy assets like stocks and so forth. So the credit system is much bigger than just this
Right.
investment in productive material. But at the same time, it's necessary in order to be able to fund these kinds of long-term productive investments.
Right. You actually touch a very important point. I'd like to ask at least could we just eliminate, kind of limit some certain harmful debt, such as, bullish or stimulated bullish loans, leverage loans, those type of harmful debt?
Well, it's one of the things I always say about the economy is there are always winners and losers regardless of which way you go in policy, right? And this is a good case in point, because it would be very hard to find any specific policies that wouldn't harm substantial parts of the investor community. So yes, you could think of proposing certain things, but number one, you'd get a lot of pushback, because the people who would lose under that system of regulation are going to push back hard. That doesn't mean it might not be a good idea, but you have to carefully weigh what's going to be the impact, often unintended consequences on the economy as a whole if you try to restrict something. One of the easiest ways to do it maybe is with tax policy that will tend to favor one type of lending and asset purchase, and let's say discourage excessive lending. Or we've done it in the past with things like bank regulation on how much you can leverage and things like this. So there are ways of working with this, but right now we're at a point where there's so little regulation and there's so much tendency toward highly leveraged investments that the economy, the financial system, is much more fragile than most people realize. And so I think we're at a point where we have to look carefully at it to try to understand, is this really the stable system economists always promise us, or in fact are we in a very
Right.
unstable situation.
Well, actually, tax part is very interesting. Issue of taxation takes us to another huge topic. So I'd like to focus on in the next video
All right.
talk about tax.
Let's
Thank
do
you very
that.
much for coming.
Thank you.
Folks, if you really enjoyed the video, please subscribe our YouTube channel. Also, you can find a lot of information from Professor Noel's blog, Polarizing Political Economy. Just click below. And also, you can also buy the book, International Political Economy, Business of War and Peace. Bye-bye.